The air in the small kitchen was thick with the smell of frying onions and garlic. Hector, sweat beading on his forehead, stirred a pot of beans, the rhythmic clinking of his spoon against the metal a familiar song. His worn hands, calloused from years of hard work, moved with practiced ease. He was a cook, a simple man with a simple dream to provide for his family. His wife Mariah hummed softly as she cleared their meager dinner table. Their two children, 8-year-old Elena and 6-year-old Miguel, sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide with anticipation for the meal. The apartment was small, the furniture old and mismatched, but it was filled with love, the walls echoing with laughter and the comforting aroma of home-cooked meals. Hector's wages as a line cook at the diner were meager, barely enough to cover their rent and put food on the table. There were days when the mountain of beans and rice seemed insurmountable, when the weight of their poverty pressed down on him like a physical burden. But he never complained, never let the despair seep into his heart. His family was his world, their love his guiding star. He worked tirelessly, his hands never still, driven by the fierce desire to shield them from hardship, to give them a better life than he had known. Every late-night shift, every blister on his hand, was a testament to his unwavering love, a silent promise whispered over steaming pots and sizzling pans. The clang of pots and pans was Hector's symphony, the sizzle of onions his applause. He moved with a practiced grace in the cramped kitchen of the diner, his movements a well-rehearsed dance. He knew the menu by heart, could recite the orders of the regulars without a second thought. He found solace in the routine, in the familiar heat of the stove, and the comforting weight of a well-seasoned cast-iron pan. He was a master of his domain, transforming simple ingredients into meals that warmed the hearts and filled the stomachs of the diner's patrons. The diner was his stage, the customers his audience. He treated each plate as a work of art, carefully plating each order with a quiet pride. A smile, a nod of appreciation, a heartfelt, "That was delicious, son," from a kind-faced old man. These were his accolades, his rewards for a job well done. He took pride in his work, in knowing that he was putting food on the table, not just for his own family, but for others as well. He was a part of their lives, a small but significant presence in their daily routines. And in that, he found a sense of purpose, a quiet satisfaction that transcended the long hours and the physical toll of his labor. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Hector, exhausted but content after another long shift, made his way home through the deserted streets. The air was cold, a biting wind whistling through the narrow alleyways. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around himself, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. As he turned a corner, he noticed a figure huddled in the shadows. A young man, barely more than a boy, sat slumped against a brick wall, his clothes torn and his face etched with despair. Hector hesitated for a moment, a flicker of apprehension in his chest. He had heard stories, whispers of muggings and violence in the dead of night. But something in the young man's demeanor, the utter hopelessness in his posture, tugged at Hector's heartstrings. He couldn't, in good conscience, simply walk away. He approached cautiously, his hand hovering near the small of his back where he kept a worn leather pouch containing his meager earnings. "Are you all right, son?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in the stillness of the night. The young man looked up, his eyes wide and unfocused. He mumbled something incoherent, his words lost in the wind. Hector took a step closer, his hand outstretched in a gesture of peace. "Do you need help?" he asked, his voice gentle. As he reached out, his fingers brushed against something hard and metallic tucked into the young man's waistband. Before Hector could react, a blinding light pierced the darkness. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by the harsh glare of a flashlight. "Police! Don't move!" a voice barked. Hector froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The cold steel of handcuffs bit into Hector's wrists. He looked on in disbelief as the officers pulled the young man to his feet, their movements rough, their words harsh and accusatory. They had found a gun tucked into the young man's waistband, a rusty revolver that looked older than Hector himself. "This is a mistake," Hector stammered, his voice trembling. "I was just trying to help him." The officers ignored him, their faces grim masks of suspicion. They bundled Hector and the young man into the back of a squad car, the slam of the doors echoing like a death knell in the silent night. At the police station, the accusations came rapid and relentless. They accused Hector of being in possession of an illegal firearm, of being part of some nefarious gang activity. His protests of innocence fell on deaf ears. They didn't want to hear his story, didn't care about the truth. Hector sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, his mind racing, his body trembling with a fear he had never known. He had never been in trouble with the law, had always prided himself on being a law-abiding citizen. And now, here he was, accused of a crime he didn't commit, trapped in a nightmare that was unfolding with terrifying speed. He thought of Maria and the children, their faces swimming before his eyes, their laughter echoing in his ears. How would he explain this to them? How could he bear the shame, the disappointment in their eyes? The weight of his predicament pressed down on him, suffocating him with its sheer injustice. The silence in the small apartment was deafening. Maria sat at the table, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. Elena and Miguel huddled on the floor, their faces pale reflections of their mother's grief. The aroma of dinner, usually a source of comfort and joy, was conspicuously absent. The table, usually laden with steaming pots and plates piled high with food, was bare save for a single flickering candle that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The empty plates seemed to mock them, a stark reminder of their absent father, the provider who was now unjustly imprisoned. Maria had explained to the children as best as she could, her voice catching in her throat as she spoke of policemen and accusations, of court dates and lawyers. They were too young to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation, but they understood that their papa, their hero, was gone. Elena, her brow furrowed in thought, asked the question that hung heavy in the air. "When is Papa coming home, Mama?" Maria, her heart breaking anew at the innocence in her daughter's voice, could only pull her children close, her tears falling freely onto their hair. The weight of their situation pressed down on them, a suffocating blanket of fear and uncertainty. The rent was due, the cupboards were bare, and the future stretched before them, a bleak and unforgiving landscape devoid of Hector's unwavering love and support. Word of Hector's arrest spread through their small community like wildfire. Neighbors who had once greeted him with warm smiles now averted their gazes, their whispers following him like shadows. The accusation, like a stain, had seeped into the fabric of his reputation, tarnishing his good name. Some, those who had known Hector for years, stood by him, their faith unshaken. They knew him to be a kind and gentle soul, a hard-working man who would never hurt a fly, let alone possess an illegal firearm. They offered Maria words of comfort and support, small acts of kindness that helped to ease the burden of their situation. But there were others, those who were quick to judge, who allowed doubt to cloud their judgment. They whispered behind cupped hands, their voices laced with suspicion and condemnation. They saw only the accusation, not the man, not the years of honest living and quiet dedication to his family. The doubt, like a poison, began to seep into Maria's heart. She had never doubted Hector for a moment, her love for him as unwavering as the sunrise. But as the days turned into weeks, and the legal system ground on with agonizing slowness, a seed of uncertainty took root in her mind. She clung to the memory of his embrace, the warmth of his love, a beacon in the darkness. But the fear, the gnawing doubt, whispered insidious doubts in her ear, threatening to extinguish the flame of hope that flickered within her. A ray of hope pierced the gloom in the form of Sarah, a young and idealistic public defender assigned to Hector's case. With her sharp mind and unwavering belief in her client's innocence, Sarah delved into the details of the arrest, determined to untangle the web of circumstantial evidence that held Hector captive. She saw through the prejudice that clouded the case, recognizing the systemic injustices that often ensnared those without the means to fight back. Hector, a hard-working immigrant with a limited grasp of English, was an easy target, his silence misconstrued as guilt. Sarah tracked down witnesses, piecing together the events of that fateful night. She discovered that the young man, a runaway caught in a web of petty crime, had planted the gun on Hector in a desperate attempt to deflect attention from himself. She fought tirelessly, her voice ringing out in the courtroom, challenging the prosecution's narrative, chipping away at the wall of assumptions and prejudice that stood between Hector and freedom. Her passion, her unwavering belief in justice, ignited a spark of hope in the hearts of Hector and his family. After weeks of agonizing uncertainty, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom, with its cold marble and stern-faced portraits of judges past, felt oppressive, the air thick with tension. Hector, his face etched with worry and sleepless nights, sat beside Sarah, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. The prosecution presented their case, their words painting a picture of Hector as a dangerous criminal, a menace to society. They twisted the facts, manipulated the truth, their voices echoing with a righteous indignation that belied the flimsiness of their evidence. Sarah countered their every argument, her voice a beacon of reason in the face of prejudice. She presented the evidence she had painstakingly gathered, her words sharp and precise, dismantling the prosecution's case piece by piece. She fought for Hector as if he were her own family, her passion a testament to her belief in his innocence. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Hector, his heart pounding in his chest, could only wait and pray, his gaze fixed on the clock on the wall, each tick a hammer blow to his soul. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the jury foreman read the verdict, not guilty. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Relief washed over Hector in a tidal wave, leaving him weak and trembling. He embraced Sarah, his eyes filled with tears of gratitude. He was free, his name cleared, but the ordeal had left its mark. Hector returned home to his family, their joyous reunion a testament to the enduring power of love and faith. But the road to recovery was long and arduous. The shadow of his wrongful accusation lingered, a constant reminder of the fragility of freedom and the capricious nature of justice. The whispers and doubts, though silenced, had left their mark. The warmth and familiarity of his community had been tainted by suspicion, the bonds of trust frayed. He returned to his job at the diner, but the joy had gone out of his work, replaced by a lingering anxiety, a fear that it could all be taken away again in an instant. He carried the scars of his ordeal, not visible wounds, but invisible marks etched deep within his soul. The experience had shaken his faith in the system, exposed the flaws and biases that lurked beneath the surface of justice. But amidst the pain and uncertainty, a new resolve took root within him. He had experienced firsthand the devastating consequences of injustice, witnessed the ease with which innocent lives could be shattered by unfounded accusations and systemic prejudice. He emerged from his ordeal a changed man, no longer content to simply live his life, to be a passive observer in a world rife with inequality. He became an advocate for the wrongly accused, a voice for the voiceless, his own experience fueling a burning desire to fight for a more just and equitable society. He shared his story, his voice trembling at times, but his words carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom and the unwavering conviction of a man who had stared injustice in the face and emerged victorious. He became a beacon of hope for others who had endured similar ordeals, his resilience a testament to the indomitable spirit that resides within us all.